The light flickered overhead, humming like a dying insect trapped in glass. Shadows crawled along the concrete walls, restless, thin, like the ghosts of other people who had sat in that same steel chair before her. Lieutenant Mara Keene didn't move. Her wrists were cuffed tight enough to numb her hands, but her heartbeat was steady, controlled, deliberate. Her breathing didn't betray her. Even her eyes, cool and distant as deep water, didn't flicker toward the man pacing in front of her. Sergeant Vaughn was young, too young for the weight he tried to carry. His uniform was creased like it had been pressed an hour ago, his boots spotless, the kind of clean that belonged to men who hadn't seen real dirt yet. The pistol in his hand trembled just enough to betray his nerves. He thought she couldn't see it, but she saw everything. The tension in his shoulders, the quick, shallow breaths. The way he kept glancing toward the door, half expecting someone to walk in and tell him he'd gone too far. No one did. "So," he said, circling her like a wolf still learning to hunt. "You're not going to talk?" His voice cracked slightly, too loud in the silence. "You think this is some kind of game?" Mara didn't answer. He stepped closer, the soles of his boots scraping against the floor. "You're a spy," he hissed. "That's what they said. You people think you can just walk into our base, feed us lies, and walk out breathing?" He stopped in front of her, lowering his voice. "Not today." Still, she said nothing. Her gaze stayed on the floor, calm, unfocused, as if she were listening to something far away beyond the room, beyond him. Vaughn mistook that silence for fear. He smiled, a thin, humorless curve. "You're tough, huh? Navy, they said. SEAL." He spat the word like it meant nothing. "Tell me, Lieutenant, how tough are you when it's your head against the barrel?" He leaned in, close enough for her to smell the faint staleness of his breath, the sweat clinging to his collar. The gun lifted, pressing cold steel against her temple. The room went very still. The hum of the light, the slow drip of a leaking pipe, the distant echo of boots outside the corridor. Time stretched. Mara's jaw tightened, not in fear, but in focus. Her pulse slowed, sinking to a rhythm she'd been trained to find when everything else fractured. Heartbeat, breath, environment, control. "You don't know what you're doing," she said finally. Her voice was low, even, stripped of emotion. 6 words that fell into the air like the pull of a pin. Vaughn blinked, thrown off by her calm. He expected begging, anger, anything but that steady, almost pitying tone. "What did you just say?" Her eyes rose to meet his. They weren't pleading, they weren't defiant, they were something else, something colder, older. "You don't know what you're doing," she repeated. He laughed, too loud. A brittle sound that bounced off the walls. "I think I do," he said, pressing the barrel harder against her skin. "I'm the one holding the gun." Mara tilted her head slightly, the movement so slow it made him flinch without knowing why. "Exactly," she whispered. For a heartbeat, the silence grew teeth. Outside, a door slammed somewhere down the hall. The echo was sharp, metallic, like a signal. Mara's gaze didn't shift, but inside her mind the gears began to move. She was mapping exits, counting steps, calculating timing. Her stillness wasn't surrender, it was the gathering of force. Vaughn didn't see it. He only saw a prisoner, a woman who wouldn't speak, a target that didn't fear him. And that, more than anything, terrified him. The light flickered again, dimmer this time. The hum deepened. Mara's pulse matched it perfectly. That's when the clock started ticking. The room was still heavy with the scent of oil and metal, but Mara's mind was nowhere near the outpost anymore. The moment the gun touched her temple, the years peeled away. The concrete, the heat, the stench of sweat, all of it dissolved into salt and cold. She was back in the Pacific, midnight drills, black water stretching to forever. The waves swallowed the sky, and the only sound was the breath rasping through her regulator and Chief Daniel's voice cutting through the surf like a blade. "Control your breathing, Keene," he'd bellowed, voice deep as thunder. "You panic, You drown. Calm is your weapon. Control the rhythm, and the world will dance to it. She had been 23, exhausted, shivering, her body trembling as the current slammed her sideways. The other recruits had already quit, 15 down to 6, 6 down to 2. The moonlight bled across the water like silver veins. Mara remembered how the fear used to crawl up her spine then, how it whispered that she couldn't do this, that she wasn't built for this life. But every time that voice spoke, she went quieter inside, not louder. That was the trick. Silence over panic, focus over fear. She felt the same silence now, washing through her veins as steady as a tide. Her wrists throbbed from the cuffs, her pulse slow and deliberate. Every sense stretched outward like a net, the faint scuff of a boot heel outside the door guard shifting weight. The buzz of the light, a weak filament near burnout, the slight squeak of Vaughn's finger tightening unconsciously against the trigger guard. She listened, not just with her ears but with her training, cataloging everything. Fear didn't paralyze her, it sharpened the edges. In her mind, the room became a map. Exit on the left. Vent overhead, too narrow. Chair bolted, but the bolts were old, uneven. Vaughn's stance, left foot forward, right too close to the table leg. If he fired, the recoil would send him off balance. If she moved, the left hinge on the door would give faster than the right. Every detail, every variable information. Chief Daniel's voice echoed again, rough and patient. The mind of a SEAL doesn't freeze, it calculates, it doesn't wait for the moment, it makes it. The sound of Vaughn's breath dragged her back. He was close, still trying to intimidate her. The muzzle pressed into her temple again, a small tremor betraying his uncertainty. He didn't understand that she wasn't frozen, she was aligning, calculating, waiting. The timing mattered more than strength. Her body remembered everything it had ever been taught: how to breathe when lungs burned, how to move when the world screamed at you to stay still, how to let adrenaline become focus instead of chaos. The years of cold, dark training didn't fade, they lived beneath her skin like muscle memory carved in bone. Vaughn shifted again, muttering something under his breath, something about obedience, about orders. She didn't hear the words, only the cadence. His voice cracked slightly, fear bleeding through arrogance. That was all she needed to know. Mara inhaled slowly, counting the beat. In through the nose, hold for 3, exhale through the mouth. Her heart synced to the rhythm. Calm wasn't the absence of fear, it was the discipline to keep the line steady while the storm tried to break it. In the flickering light, she felt her old self return, the diver in the dark, the sniper in the dust, the soldier who learned long ago that survival was never about luck. It was about control. The training never left, it waited. Vaughn clicked the safety off again, a metallic snap loud enough to echo. He thought it was power. She heard it as a countdown. Her eyes lifted, slow and deliberate. For the first time, she met his stare fully. Not with defiance, not with rage, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided what would happen next. She didn't need to move yet. Timing, Chief Daniels had said. Every second counts twice, once for those who rush, and once for those who wait. Her breath evened out. Her pulse slowed further. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks of the compound. Inside, the storm gathered behind her stillness. She could feel it now, the rhythm. The world was about to dance. The room tightened around them, every sound amplified, every breath carrying weight. The flickering light buzzed overhead, a faint stutter in its rhythm, like the world holding its breath before something breaks. Vaughn still thought he had the upper hand. The gun gleamed in his grasp, his jaw set in the brittle confidence of someone who's never faced what true violence looks like. Mara kept her gaze low, the calm stillness of her eyes a quiet warning he mistook for defeat. He spoke again, his words trembling beneath a forced sneer. "You think this silence makes you strong?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the tremor beneath the bravado. "You'll talk, everyone does." Mara didn't answer. She was listening not to him, but to the echo of her own pulse, the rhythm of breath and light and timing. In the silence between his words, she flexed her wrists, feeling the cuffs grind against her skin. The metal bit deep, tearing at flesh, but pain was just another data point, another sensation to control. She angled her hands, subtle and deliberate. Vaughn's attention stayed fixed on her face, on the illusion of submission he was desperate to believe in. He didn't see the tension build in her shoulders, the slight roll forward of her weight. He didn't hear the whisper of breath as she exhaled once, steadying everything inside her. When it came, it was instant, a flash of movement too fast to process. The snap echoed, sharp and wet. The chain of the cuffs broke under the torque, slicing into her palms. Blood welled instantly, dark and slick. Vaughn's eyes widened, his reflexes lagging behind instinct. He jerked the gun up, mouth opening to shout, but she was already moving. 3 seconds. That was all it took. The first strike shattered his balance, a twist of her arm, the heel of her palm slamming into his wrist. The gun fired once, the shot exploding into the ceiling. Dust rained down. Before the shell hit the floor, she pivoted, her knee driving into his ribs. He gasped, air leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. The gun clattered from his hand, spinning across the concrete. By the second, she was behind him, one arm hooked around his neck, the other forcing his elbow upward in a joint lock. His strength meant nothing now. Every movement of his body belonged to her control. By the third, he was on the ground, face pressed to the cold floor, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Mara crouched above him, her own breathing steady, measured, her pulse the only calm rhythm left in the room. Blood trickled down her wrist, dripping from her fingers onto the concrete, one slow drop after another. Vaughn struggled, but it was over before he realized it had begun. The silence after was louder than the gunshot. His eyes darted toward the weapon lying a few feet away, but before he could move, she was there faster, quieter than his fear could comprehend. She stood over him now, gun in hand. The same weapon that had been pressed to her head moments ago. The same weapon that had once made him feel powerful. Mara looked down at him, expression unreadable. The blood on her wrists glistened under the harsh light, the cuffs still hanging loose around them like ghosts of restraint. She didn't raise the gun, she didn't have to. She stepped closer until the tip of her boot pressed against his chest, grounding him to the moment. Then she leaned forward, close enough for him to hear the evenness of her breathing, the calm that should have terrified him more than any threat. "I warned you," she said quietly, voice low enough to make him strain to hear it. The words carried no anger, no cruelty, only the finality of truth. "Never point a gun unless you're ready to meet the person who isn't afraid to die." Vaughn's throat moved, his breath shallow, eyes wide with the dawning realization that what stood before him wasn't a prisoner. It was a lesson carved in flesh and silence. Mara straightened, dropping the gun's magazine, sliding it across the floor where he couldn't reach. She didn't look back, she didn't need to. The fight was done. The air still crackled with its echo, with the ghost of what might have been. She walked toward the door, leaving streaks of blood on the steel table as she passed. Behind her, Vaughn stayed where he was, shaking, staring at the weapon that had once made him feel untouchable. Now it just looked small. The flickering light steadied at last, the hum softening. The clock had finished its count. The sun was already bleeding through the cracks of the interrogation block when the door burst open. Heavy boots struck concrete in measured rhythm, not hurried, not panicked. Command presence carried its own gravity. The base commander filled the doorway like a shadow with purpose, his uniform immaculate, his expression cold and unreadable. Behind him trailed two MPs, rifles slung low, their eyes sweeping across the wreckage of the room, the overturned chair, the bullet hole in the ceiling, the faint metallic scent of blood and gunpowder that clung to the air like smoke after a storm. Vaughn was still on the floor, not restrained, not injured beyond bruises, but motionless in that way that meant something had broken deeper than bone. His gun was gone, lying in the corner where Mara had left it. His voice, once sharp with arrogance, had vanished into the quiet that now consumed the room. Mara stood by the door, wrists still streaked with blood, her uniform torn at the cuffs. She wasn't hiding the marks or explaining them away. Her back was straight, her chin level, her gaze steady on the commander. The silence between them was heavy, disciplined two soldiers who both knew the weight of protocol, of self-control, of unspoken truths that didn't need reports to be understood. "Lieutenant Keene," the commander said, his tone neutral but edged with steel. "Sergeant Vaughn." His eyes moved from one to the other, assessing the air like a man reading a battlefield after the smoke clears. "Explain." Mara didn't speak. She simply lifted her right hand and saluted, the motion crisp despite the blood crusting along her palm. Then she lowered it and said, "No report, sir." The commander's brow furrowed slightly. He turned to Vaughn. "Sergeant?" Vaughn swallowed hard. His voice came out hoarse, small. He hesitated, searching for words that didn't exist in his vocabulary. "She taught me what restraint looks like, sir." The commander held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. No further questions. He understood what that meant and what it didn't. Orders had been crossed, lines blurred, but the lesson had already been delivered. He dismissed them both without ceremony. As the MPs stepped back, Mara brushed past Vaughn. He didn't move, didn't meet her eyes. The shame was too heavy, the realization too raw. He had faced someone who didn't need rank or permission to command respect. Someone who carried war in silence, not in noise. Outside, the desert air hit her like a wave of light. The horizon stretched endlessly, the kind of empty that made people forget how small they were. Her hands stung with every heartbeat, but she didn't bind them. Pain was a language she spoke fluently, one that kept her grounded in the present, not trapped in the past. Word of what happened spread faster than any official memo. No one knew details, only fragments. That a captured SEAL had turned a gun against its wielder without firing a shot. That the sergeant who mocked her now saluted her every time she passed. That in the interrogation room, silence had been louder than violence. By dusk, even the hardened veterans at the base whispered her name like a warning and a prayer. Some called her the ghost in the chair. Others said she was the reminder of what discipline looked like when stripped of ego. To them, she was proof that the stories about SEALs weren't exaggerations. They were cautionary tales written in blood and patience. Mara didn't stay for any of it. The next morning, she was gone. No goodbye, no ceremony, no file stamped with explanation. Just a note left on the commander's desk, 3 words written in steady ink. Asterisk mission complete, sir. Asterisk. As the transport hummed through the desert, she watched the base shrink in the distance, the sun flaring against the windshield. Her reflection looked back at her, tired but unbroken. The cuffs had left marks on her skin that would fade, but the silence she carried would not. True strength didn't roar. It didn't need to. It remembered, endured, and walked away when the lesson had been learned. By nightfall, the wind swept over the compound, carrying whispers that turned to legend. And somewhere, far from the noise, Mara Keene closed her eyes and let the quiet settle around her like armor. Silence is the deadliest weapon.